Hello, welcome to Office Hours. This is Office Hours episode 34. It's the first episode of the year 2017. So welcome to the future. It's officially the future now, here in the year 2017. We've got the internet. We got that. We got the internet and we got Twitch, and that's a great place to start. Before we get into today's episode, before I start giving you the spiel about Office Hours and all that business, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of cool announcements from the weekend. So if you're watching this live, maybe this is new information, maybe it's not. If you're watching it on YouTube or any of the other venues, you might enjoy Office Hours content, wink, in the future, then maybe this is old news. But a couple of quick things vis-a-vis me GMing on the internet. And by we, I mean the folks at Roleplay and myself have announced a couple of new projects. The first being that I'm going to be tutoring famed internet non-content creator Krendor in preparation for his first foray as a game master. So I'm going to be kind of walking him through how to GM a little OSR game called Mutant Future, and he's going to be GMing an adventure he calls Daikia, which, sometimes you got to be so bad you're good. So I'm gonna be teaching Krendor how to GM. So that'll be a nightmare, and it'll be, I guess, at least partially my responsibility to make sure that it doesn't turn out to be a complete shit show. But it'll be hilarious. More personally relevant, I think, for me is we're gonna be doing a one shot in February of Swan Song, and it's gonna be live. And it's going to feature me and JP and Jeff and DJ Wheat and my friend Matt Mercer. And we're going to do 8 hours of Swan Song. People have been clamoring for more information about this, asking me all kinds of stuff. I've been pretty tight-lipped so far because I'm still, I'm working out the details. But I will tell you this, because you're here for Office Hours, looking for that inside scoop. It is going to be set post episode 50. If you're a Swan Song fan, you will see perhaps what that means. It's going to be set after episode 50. This is going to be a forward-facing episode rather than like a Swan Song stories set in the past continuity. So there's that. For me, though, I think the thing that I'm the most excited about is we're starting a new campaign in 2017 called Nebula Jazz. This is going to be a Fate accelerated game. It's going to be our kind of high adventure sci-fi sort of comic book, superhero movie style, like colorful, punchy sci-fi. And what's most exciting for me as a GM about this, I'm going to lay the nerdy GM shit on you. What I think is most exciting for me is that I'm, more than any other game that I've run, I'm really leaning into my experience with music as a source of inspiration for the game, right? Normally I go straight to like video games or comics or TV shows or movies. Nebula Jazz is going to start with the music that I love and then work back from there. So I've been posting some of the stuff I've been listening to. If you're interested in seeing what inspires me as a GM and how that's going to affect that show, you can check out that thread over at community.itmejp.com. So obviously carrying on with Court of Swords, but that's kind of my initial beginning of the year spiel in terms of the stuff that I'm going to be doing for roleplay, and then with GMing on Roll20 Presents, we're going to carry on with the Adventurers League. We're going to finish season 1. We're going to keep going with Apocalypse World. And then when both of those shows end, each one will be replaced with something new and cool. We'll let you know when we have more details about that. So that begins the year of 2017 for GM Adam. And of course, we're going to keep doing this thing. We're going to keep doing Office Hours. So Office Hours started last year in February. I believe February 15th is the first episode went up on YouTube. We're going to be releasing, once I have the hosting situation started, we're going to be releasing all the episodes from that year as a podcast, which I know you've been looking forward to, something you can carry around. So it'll give you an opportunity to go back and listen to that old GM advice from me, on your way to work or school or wherever your favorite podcasts are listened to, I guess in your ears. We're going to carry on this year doing things much the same. I've got a few ideas for special episodes, but for the most part, we're going to carry on. And what that means is, from week to week, you can visit my website at www.adam-koble.com. You can click that office hours link. There's a form there, a mysterious form. It's not that mysterious. You can fill it out with your name or preferred nom de guerre. You can tell me what GMing thing is driving you crazy, and then I can try to help you work that out on the show. So go do that if that's a thing that you're interested in, if you want to get involved. You want to see how it works? You want to do a test one? Here's how it's going to go. It's going to go a little something like this.
Hi Adam, my name is Michael, Canth Evolved on Twitch, and my question relates to using system mechanics, specifically powered by the Apocalypse moves, on a varying fictional scale. In a recent campaign, the players and I agreed that we had exhausted the beat-by-beat pacing of a particular arc, and we were all ready to fast forward into the next chapter. In this particular instance, we opted to use the system's move mechanics as written to tackle scenes and actions set on a much larger scale than what we'd traditionally been working on. A single triggered move encompassed the results of an entire planetary invasion. In this instance, the session went well, and we all at the table were pleased with the results of moving the fiction forward at this pace. However, I could not shake the feeling of an inherent risk of zooming out too much and relying on mechanics that simply weren't designed to address fiction on such a wide scale. Generally speaking, are there any potential pitfalls to look out for when manipulating mechanics in this way? And conversely, are there any specific systems or subsystems that handle this type of fictional scale flip-flopping particularly well? As always, thank you for your insight.
Michael, also known as Canth Evolved, +5 experience for your excellent enunciation of your question. Another +5 for detail. Thank you. So let's get on board with what we're talking about here. So in case you are in the audience and you're like, powered by the what? What are moves are when? I can move 30 feet in a round. Is that? No. So I just want to lay out what a powered by the Apocalypse World game move is. Okay, so Apocalypse World came out. A bunch of people made games based on it. Collectively, they were referred to as games that are powered by the apocalypse. When we're referring to one of those games, generally speaking, the discrete elements of mechanism in those games are called moves. Some of them are GM moves, some of them are player moves. They're different, but function more or less the same. A move, either way, GM or player facing, in Powered by the Apocalypse is a ludonarrative element. Ludonarrative meaning the intersection of game mechanic and narration. They are a ludonarrative element triggered by a fictional condition that resolve a mechanical aspect and then guide back into that fiction. So you can think of them as a fork in the road, right? When the move is triggered, when the game detects, obviously the game is not currently capable of detecting these things on its own, but when you as players on behalf of the game detect that a move has been triggered, the narrative pauses, branches into several sub-futures. Dice or a choice or something will occur that guides you forward in one of several directions. But whatever happens, the game narratively continues onward. Now, generally speaking, in most Powered by the Apocalypse games, you're going to be rolling 2d6. You're going to be adding or subtracting a stat, which might be cool or hot or dexterity or dark. And you're going to hit one of 3 results. You're going to roll a 10 or better, which will mean that the thing you set out to do when you triggered the move, you get that. And you might get a little extra shine on it, right? A little extra polish, a little benefit, something extra to carry forward. There might also be like a little extra stability to your move, because sometimes, move results are unstable or temporary. A 10 might help you cement that. On a 7 to 9, mathematically the most common result, you get what you want, but you might have to work a little harder for it than you expected, or pay a little extra, or maybe there's some cost attached you didn't expect to have to deal with. If you resolve that cost, you can have the thing you want. It's often a hard choice that's presented as 7 to 9. On a 6 or less, that's considered a miss. Some other things might happen, but the GM gets to make a move. Sometimes this is prescribed by the move itself. Sometimes the move says, if you miss, this happens. Other times, the GM just makes whatever move is appropriate from their list. Now, not all moves are like this. Not all moves involve dice. Not all Powered by the Apocalypse games involve dice, in fact. Undying doesn't use them at all. But the thing is, they all have this same fictional trigger, mechanical element, return to the fiction flow, right? You can clearly point to them in most cases and say, this is a move that has happened. The moves are triggered by specific things in the fiction, moves lead out into the fiction again, and they prompt continued action. We play the Apocalypse engine like a game of weird group table tennis, back and forth to each other until the session is over. Now, a GM's moves are triggered non-fictionally. They're triggered when a player fails. They're triggered mechanically. So when a player fails a roll, or conversationally, when the players look to you to find out what happens, that's when you make a move. And you choose your move according to the fictional circumstances of the game, but it's not quite the same, right? Because the GM isn't necessarily acting within the fiction. The GM often acts above the fiction. But we're basically talking about player moves here. So what I wanted to talk about was just setting that ground for all of us to have this discussion about moves, because if you're coming to this conversation from Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, World of Darkness, you know, it's a discrete mechanical thing that's different and unique in its execution from, say, a diplomacy roll in D&D or, you know, wits plus guns, right? Like it's its own thing and it works a certain way. And now I think we've got a good handle on what it is. So generally speaking, if you take a look at any Powered by the Apocalypse game, right, grab whatever one is near you, grab the Sprawl or grab Urban Shadows or grab Monster Hearts, whatever's sitting around, and take a look at the moves, and you'll find that the things that trigger those moves tend to be moment-to-moment stuff. And God knows that in my games, you know, I tend to get hooked into that grind quite easily. Because the game encourages, the game demands the GM respond to everything with, what do you do, right? It's a prime principle of the game. Player says they want to do something. Everyone agrees it's a move. They roll. You describe the results as the GM. You say, what do you do? Player does something. Make the move. Results. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Over and over and over. And this can end up in a situation where what do you do becomes what happens right fucking now. And that can lead to weeks of campaign time encompassing hours of playtime and a sense of breakneck narrative with little room to breathe that never really goes anywhere, right? You get a day of character life that spans sessions. And that can be exhausting. And it can also constrain you in terms of growth, because there's only so much a character can grow in like a couple of days. It can be really tiring. If you want to see what happens in a few days or a few months of play, like in-game, fictionally, the first and sort of loosest way to handle expanding time is to look at the moves and ask questions of the group about their progress in play. So here's the thing. Take a look at those moves, right? And you're probably, because we're used to these moment-to-moment fictional cues, you're probably going to feel like each move is supposed to be, you do this thing, what happens immediately following it, right? It's a snap thing. It's like, I draw my gun and I fire. What happens now? I dodge the bullet. What happens now? The house is on fire. What happens now? Right? It's like one thing after another. And to be fair, some moves you can't really bend. You're never going to see a hack and slash roll that represents days of fighting. It's not for that. But you're definitely going to have that happen from time to time when, say, the Savvy Head accesses Augury, right? Looking at space for specific moves that already exist to take up more time is a way to elide some of that time and avoid the whole, are we breaking the game issue? You're interpreting the results of the move in a grander scale. This can be applied to something like acting under fire quite easily. Sometimes the fire is a week of work, right? You could say, you've come in contact with the diseased traders. They've left the town, but your dalliance with the young trader has left you susceptible to the maelstrom's sickness. Act under fire over the next week to see if the sickness gets its claws in you, right? It doesn't have to be right now you're either sick or not sick. It's you're fighting the sickness over a week, right? Some moves you can do in the broader scale, and you can say, all right, this move takes you a few days to make. Skinner has moves like this. The Hocus, the Hardholder, lots of them have these moves. Before they were erased from the universe, the Operator had moves like this, and as a result, all the gigs can represent time. And again, I don't know what Powered by the Apocalypse game you're playing, because you talked about Planetary Invasion, so it could be any of them, but look at the moves as an experiment. Just write out the list of all the basic moves and think about how each one could be applied long or short term, right? Make a list then of the ones you think could be drawn out over time. I can think of more than a few in Apocalypse World or Dungeon World, at least, the two that I'm most familiar with. It could be applied over a greater period of time without being modified at all. That being said, don't be shy. Don't be shy about modifying the game. I mean, Apocalypse World as an engine is eminently hackable right out of the box. Like, no shit, right? There's a whole chapter about it. That's why all these Powered by the Apocalypse games exist. The MC is encouraged, at least in base Apocalypse World, to develop their own moves to cover fictional stuff not designed in the core game. Honestly, and I sometimes fall short on this because it feels like game design, and game design feels hard, even though MCing is a form of game design. I want to encourage you and myself more to create custom moves in the game. And these can be brand new moves from start to finish or a modification of the existing moves to fit specific NPCs or situations. You have that authority as an MC in Apocalypse World. If you're finding yourself as an MC of a Powered by the Apocalypse game in a position where this fictional thing that seems like it needs a crossroads of possibility, and Act Under Fire isn't doing it for you, you make a custom move, right? Now, this can be things like bending the move set to show the features of a particular character, right? So you've got a real tough warlord, and this warlord doesn't take shit from anybody. You could write a move that's like, when you go aggro on balls, roll plus hard. This is the replacement go aggro. It doesn't work the same way. On a 10 plus, he doesn't kill you and treats you with respect. On a 7 to 9, he kills someone you know, or takes a limb, or declares war on your tribe. On a miss, all three, right? Like, it's a way to show that the normal fictional triggers don't apply here. That's a terrible move. Don't use that. I just made that up now. It's garbage. But the point here is you can change the rules, right? And you use custom moves to do that. And these can be adaptations of existing moves, or you can write your own brand new moves. And you'll often find yourself writing these in situations where you need the players to functionally make like a saving throw against something. Like I mentioned before about getting sick, being exposed to mutation. You can look at moves that will do that. But what I think people often overlook, and to the point where I overlook these so much, I don't even know if they're in second edition Apocalypse World. They have to be. But I can't remember because I overlooked them so much. Are moves for eliding time in the oft discussed but rarely implemented love letters, right? People who've played Apocalypse World before, maybe you're nodding, maybe you're thinking. Love letters, Oh yeah, that's a thing. I forgot about those. Yeah, well, me too, most of the time. So here's the thing about love letters. They're engineered to bring a character whose player has missed a few sessions back into the fold, or to do a time skip thing, just like you're describing, for everyone in the group. They're great for refreshing play, right? For jumping forward, and they're hugely interesting if you're willing to get a little weird with them. In this case, in your case specifically, Michael, a custom move written for each player, they're love letters after all. You have to craft them lovingly for each person. Can't just write one for everybody. They're not form letters. To cover downtime can be a great way to close an act and open a new one on new fictional ground. And you can feel free to go as hard or as gentle on these as feels right. Maybe your moves offer little opportunities, tiny chances to do new things in the new fiction, right? Maybe grant hold that can be spent to manipulate a new government after the planetary takeover, right? Like, dear Spider, you've spent the last few months trying to ingratiate yourself among the new nobility. They're snooty, they're awful, but by God, you need to work on them or you're going to get kicked off the planet. Go ahead and roll plus manipulative. On a 10 plus, hold 3. On a 7 to 9, hold 1. On a 6, tell me somebody you've insulted, and what do you think you're going to do about that? Spend your hold 1 for 1 to get a favor from a noble, learn a secret about a noble, etc., right? And this is a way to both give the player an opportunity to make some shit up, but also to bank some hold to make the fiction more interesting and to tie them into it later, right? Now, you can do it in a small way like that, or if the player is in a position to make a big change, you could say something like, Dear Dremmer, well, that fight sure didn't go very well for you, huh? Last we saw, you'd driven your truck right into a concrete wall, and were nothing more than a ball of fire. Go ahead and roll plus hard. Let's see what's left of you. On a 10 plus, you can stay who you are. A couple of weeks in the infirmary, you'll be okay. On a 7 to 9, choose one. You die, or you come back as a new playbook. On a miss, well, rip Dremmer. Get a new playbook, start a new character, right? Like you can bend the rules and you can make these hit as hard as you want because you're the MC and that's how it goes. They allow you to elide distance. They allow you to give the players an opportunity to set an interesting fictional tone at the very beginning of a new arc. And like a good love letter in real life, you want to understand your players and the things that they love and desire and give them the things that are going to make them all hot and bothered for the next fictional element, right? Don't be a dick. You don't want to write a love letter that's like, Dear baby, fuck you. Roll plus hot. On a 10, you suck. On a 7 to 9, choose 3 terrible things that happened to you. On a miss, get out of my house. Like, you don't be vindictive about these. Never put your players in a position where they don't want to make the love letter roll. It doesn't mean everything has to be great and roses for their character, but you do want to give them an opportunity to suffer interestingly. Be a fan of the player's characters, right? Follow your principles, follow your agenda, do all that shit. And that can give you the space to both elide time in your campaign and play by the rules. Vincent wants you to do this. And ostensibly, you're not playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game that's like too different from baseline AW. Now, just as a quick thing for all of you at home, when you submit questions like this, Michael did a great job explaining to me the problem, but I probably would have been able to answer the question more directly if I knew what game that they were playing. So try to do that. Give me the game you're playing at least so that I can kind of like look into it a little bit. I answered this one based predominantly on basic Apocalypse World. Now, I wanted to say something about this and about custom moves because there are drawbacks and downfalls to be aware of in eliding time. I'm going to tell you a story, all right? Story time. Story time from the forum days. Okay, so in the past, when I had more free time on my hands, I used to spend much of it browsing various internet forums about role-playing games, thinking about RPGs, talking about them with the sundry minds of the internet. And when Apocalypse World came out, people started hacking it, talking about what kinds of games they could get out of it. And somebody started designing a Game of Thrones Apocalypse World hack. So, okay, all right. It was in the sort of alpha stage, the like what if stage. It was like, what are we going to do? How can I make this? What moves can I make? That sort of thing. And people were just sort of shooting the shit about ideas for moves and playbooks. And someone suggested something. I'm going to use this as an example of what never to do. Now, the thread that this came from, everyone came to consensus it was a bad idea. There's no aspersions being cast on the person who made up this move. But here's the thing that you never want to do. So the suggestion that was made about a Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game was, this is a core move in the game. When you play the Game of Thrones, roll plus influence, and basically covered like all the political machinations of the series in one move. Functionally, this would be the same as an Apocalypse World move that said, when you struggle with scarcity in your community, roll plus hot. Or a Dungeon World move that says, when you explore a dungeon looking for treasure, roll plus int. You want to not elide, you know, the whole point of the game. Don't do that. Look at what your game is about and don't skip that. If your game is about, you know, boots on the ground, gritty intergalactic battles, don't zoom out so far that all the other basic moves stop being relevant, right? Don't do that. Give people space to play the game. You don't want to wipe out all the other moves and their design. The thing is, if you find yourself falling into that hole, and I heard a little bit of this in your question, if you find yourself in a position where you want to elide the whole game into a single move, you're not playing the right game anymore, right? If what you want is stepped back kind of imperial sci-fi, you want Dune and not Starship Troopers, stop playing the Starship Troopers game and find or write a Dune game instead, right? Only add where addition would make your game richer. Don't fast forward all the good stuff that the designers have baked into their game. All right? Good luck. You can do it. I believe in you.
Hey Adam, my name is James. My question is about NPCs. I feel like the creation and playing of NPCs is the weakest part of my GMing. I don't really do different voices very well. I worry that the characters I create don't feel like they have any identity to them. What advice can you give about creating and playing interesting NPCs? So,
I've talked a lot in the past about ways to humanize your NPCs, how to make them interesting. You know, it's hugely important to games, even where character focus is not a thing. NPCs are a big fucking deal. You know, even in the least character-oriented games, you still want the innkeep or the shopkeeper or the blacksmith to have some degree of personality when you interact with them. You don't want Final Fantasy I NPCs who are like, welcome to yon shop. Welcome to yon shop. Welcome to yon shop. Dost thou love me? But thou must. Right? You want to give them some oomph, because interacting with fictional characters is a fun part of role-playing games. So we as GMs want to make them at least a little bit fun and cool to engage with. And, you know, I'm not going to go into a big long thing about making characters interesting, because I think previous episodes have covered a lot of that. But I will say this, because it bears repeating. I never really think about any more than 3 things for a given NPC. Just the 3 things that matter most. Not like hair color or eye color or bullshit like that. Not even class or race. But the 3 things that make an NPC interesting to me, to the world, and to the PCs. So for example, here's an NPC. Naive and childlike, illegal artificial intelligence, curiously amoral. Or taxi driver, ambitious, desperate crush on Bonbon. Mouth like a sailor, kind of a spineless toady when it really comes down to it, desperate for blood and glory, right? Just rule of 3, pick 3 things that are interesting about your character. I stole this from Jared Sorensen, who seems to like things in groups of 3. I think it came from his game Octane, citing my sources. For me, that's all that matters, right? Is those 3 things. That's where I start. That's where I return to. It's the most important shit about creating NPCs. Simplification will help you when combined with human desires for each character. Portray them with integrity, and that's the first step towards them being interesting to your players. Past episodes cover that in greater detail. What I wanted to stop and talk more about, because you asked this in the text version of your question, but didn't use the word in the audio portion, is diversity among your characters. So as far as creating a diverse cast of characters goes, that is something that I am particularly interested in, because I think that representation portrayal is a huge deal in all forms of games. And I think that as GMs, whether the role-playing games that we're playing actively support diversity in our games, mechanically or textually, like I'm thinking Urban Shadows does a good job of calling this stuff out. A 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons specifically calls out things like race and gender as important to think about for your character. I think the thing is that as GMs, if we're playing a game that calls that out, it's our job to play the game as it's written and to create diverse worlds, but also we're people creating content. We are as important as the people that make Overwatch or The Witcher or whatever. We have a smaller audience, but it's our job to portray a world that is full of diverse and interesting people, because that makes us better at our job. It makes these games more fun and interesting. And we want to normalize the idea that there are lots of different kinds of people out there, even or especially in fictional spaces, right? Because we actively have the ability as GMs. This is what's great about it. We actively have the ability to say, fuck you to the real world and create a world that is as diverse as we want to make it and shows off different kinds of characters as broadly and as interestingly as we can. So, I mean, consider it this way, right? And this is advice that I've given before. The NPCs in your game, they aren't just people in the world, right? In many ways, because the PCs are the eye that looks out into the world, the NPCs are vehicles for the kinds of things that exist in your world, right? Like, okay, for example, in Shadowrun, so you're playing Shadowrun, you introduce an NPC who is a low-level thug for the Humanist Poly Club in a bad part of Seattle, right? You introduce this character. Now, that guy, this low-level humanist, this racist, he's not just some neo-Nazi to get shot in the face, though that's probably where he's going to end up. He's representative of larger themes in the game, right? Making choices about that NPC shows the world through him as a lens. It shows the players that there are people who hate each other based on their genetic makeup, that those people have taken advantage of or exist within the class struggle of the game, and that they exist enough to be a threat, or at least a complication, to Shadowrunners, which makes them important to the narrative, right? It's not just, hey, here's a neo-Nazi. It's, hey, here's a neo-Nazi who reflects this stuff in the game overall. You can think of this kind of world population as a two-way street, right? If something is important to your fiction, to your narrative, whether it's a faction or a theme or a mood, a culture, a class of people, it should be represented by NPCs that bring it to life. And on the flip side, introducing an NPC puts a spotlight on that character as a partial representation of their class, gender, orientation, and general space in the game fiction. Now, you have to be careful with that latter point, because using NPCs as stereotypes drains all the meaning out of using them to illustrate things about the game. Be mindful that there's no such thing in game or in real life as a monoculture, right? You know, all X are Y should be a false statement for the most part when you're talking about cultures or factions in your game. What I mean is that one elf being pale-skinned, tall, and snooty might mean that many of them are. It might be common traits among elves, but it doesn't mean that they all are, because that shit is boring too, right? Diversity isn't about having one dwarf, one elf, one human, and one hobbit in the party. It's about showing that Gimli and Legolas and Boromir and Samwise are not 100% representative of their entire people. Look at all the tension between Boromir and Aragorn. They're both humans. Well, Aragorn's like a special human, but they're both humans. But what makes them interesting is how they're different from one another, right? We learn something about the race of men, but we also learn something about what it means to be a Dunedain or not by looking at the ways that they contrast. So the thing here is that diversity contains an element of experience. It's about showing that the world has lots of things going on in it, complex, interesting things that interact, and the people the PCs interact with will teach them things about the bigger picture in the world. One thing I like to do to show that stereotypes aren't reliable in games is to think about this character is like X, but Y, right? And I think we've talked about this before. The idea is to understand the ways that a character is like their culture, gender, or race, but also acknowledge the ways that they're not, right? And that way, you don't end up with a world where all the NPCs that share something in common share everything in common, because that's fucking boring, right? You don't want your players to dismiss your NPCs as, oh, another dwarf, right? Because that drains your NPCs of their meaning, and that's frustrating as a GM. So what you can do is start at the lowest possible level, right? Start at the very beginning. Diversify from the ground up. Start with your world. Think about ways to create a world that's diverse from the get-go and let your NPCs just naturally flow from that. Introduce NPCs to reinforce the things that we know. Oh, look, another Imperial officer with aspirations of power. And then destabilize what we think we know. Oh, wait, this one's an alien? How unusual. They're breaking the rules. Because that tension creates interesting characters in play, right? Grand Admiral Thrawn would be so fucking boring if he was white, British, human Admiral Thrawn, but instead he's a Chiss, and he's a high-ranking Chiss in an empire of humans. And that makes him interesting because tension. What we expect versus what's real. This helps you move away from the ideas of stereotypes. It lets you treat each character both as part of the world and an exception to the space they take up in it. PCs will want to know more about the NPCs themselves, the faction, the culture, when they recognize that tension, right? The things that make a character part of the diverse tapestry of the world should be important, but need not be the most important of the three things about them. Let's talk about Maurice. Can we talk about Maurice for a second? Let's do that. So Maurice, if you watched Mirror Shades, you know who I'm talking about. If not, Maurice is a kind of minor background character who really wanted to be romantically involved with one of the PCs. He started as a cab driver, but ended up owning his own cab company before he got bad things happen to him because of the PCs. But anyway, here's the thing about Maurice. So Maurice in Mirror Shades he's a black character. He's a black guy, right? He's an NPC who is black. His culture, the details of his life, his language is informed by, and to some degree shaped by, his blackness. It matters that he's black as much as it matters that Pi is agender, or Nika Starlight is a new prophet Christian, or Twee is a woman, but it's not all he's about. He's not a stand-in for every black person in Shadowrun, or even Seattle, or even Mirror Shades as a story. There are other black people that are similar in some ways and very different in other ways from Maurice. His blackness informs who he is as a character, but it's not all he is. If you're in a position where you're creating a character and one of your three things is like their sexuality or their gender or their race, find something more interesting to put in that place, but let it be informed by those things, right? And this stands true for anyone's experience. The NPCs in your game are defined by their imaginary history, and every part of them goes into that, right? Envision them as being a part of a culture and let that culture define things about them. But remember that we all stand apart from our culture as well. And then let your NPCs do the same, because that's what's going to be interesting about them. I like to imagine all kinds of little details about a character, right? When I'm thinking about an NPC, I like to think about the clothes they wear, the music they listen to, why they chose the car they own, the route they take when they walk to work, what makes them scared, the things they find attractive in a potential romantic partner, like little bullshit human things. What's their favorite TV show? Why? What do they feel guilty about? Little stupid things like that, because all of that can create background ambiance for the sake of the three things that the players will care about. Because players are too busy to care about all those little details, but they might help for you. What do you characterize these people? So just boil them down to those three things, but give yourself some space around that to fill in the fuzzy details. It can be really hard and intimidating to portray anything like a real world culture when it's not your own. Doing justice to a person who isn't you is hard. And it can be even harder in a game that's closer to reality. And I'm not saying Shadowrun is really close to reality, but it's set in a postulated real world, right? The thing is, we don't ever worry about being culturally insensitive to hobbits because they're not real, but you're gonna make mistakes portraying a culture that's not your own, right? Like when I try to portray characters who are straight, for example, or not white, or who are different genders than myself, let alone entirely different species, there's room for me to fuck that up. And I acknowledge that I try to do things with integrity, but it doesn't always happen. And it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're willing to try not to and do work to avoid it. When I'm portraying an NPC from a culture that isn't mine or a gender that isn't mine or whatever, I do research. I am a voracious learner. I like to learn things. I love using GMing as an excuse to listen to new albums and to read Wikipedia for hours. I know more now about Southeast Asian history and Islam than I ever would have before running Court of Swords or Swan Song. Learn things. Makes you a better GM. We've talked about this. Use role-playing games, use GMing as an excuse to make that big, beautiful brain of yours even better. So here's the thing. I'd say this. Imagine a world that has as much diversity as the one we live in or more. Call on your NPCs to be elements of that diversity, but make them people too. Respect and acknowledge the things that make them like their culture, but give them things that make them different. Make them have clear, simple desires. And don't overcomplicate things to the PCs. They're going to have a hard enough time just remembering their name. And then just practice, right? Embodiment of an NPC is easier once you've got an idea of who they are in your head, whether you're using funny voices or not. They'll become more real to you the more you treat them like real people. I know it sounds like weird writer bullshit. Your NPCs will never write themselves, but the more space you give them in your brain to exist and to make their own decisions based on their own internal structures, the easier it's going to be for you to decide things for them. But you only really need to detail 3 things. That's my opinion on it. Everybody's got their own little tips and tricks, but for me, treating NPCs like real things is what makes it work.
Hey Adam, I've got a group of friends, we're about 8 people big, been role-playing for a while. Our latest campaign should be coming to close in a couple of weeks, and I'm wanting to GM a game myself. The issue I've got is we're so large that half of us sat there bored on our phones, while the other half is doing something because of the number. How would I approach trying to downsize the group without feeling exclusive? or am I better off trying to find a different group to do my own DMing? Thanks.
All right. Well, here's what you do. Here's how you downsize your roleplay group. So you go out, save your pizza money for a few weeks, and go out to a hardware store or whatever. You buy 4 knives from wherever you purchase fine combat equipment. At the next session, throw the knives down on the table and shout, "Whoever lives, games!" And then just yell, "Can you dig it?" until they realize what's up. And they fight each other. And then you play D&D with whoever survives. No? That's not... No? Okay. All right. These are your friends? You don't want them to murder each other? All right, fine. Well, if you can't do that, if you can't survival of the fittest, your players, what you got to do is, you want to hear how not to do this? Or let me tell you a story of woe. Let me tell you about my situation. So I've had this problem. Didn't go great for me or the group, but I'll share the story anyway, and hopefully we can work out where it went wrong and how you can do better by your group. So just about the time when Swan Song and Mirror Shades were really kicking off, we were playing every week. I had just quit my job in advertising to do streaming full time. I was playing a really big game of 5th edition D&D, right? 5e had come out not that long ago. We had 12 players on our active roster, and every week 8 to 10 of them would show up. It was great. It was super fun for the first 3 levels, but as the party reached 3rd level, we hit this complexity wall that y'all know is in 5th edition. We hit the complexity wall, and suddenly the game just wasn't fun. We had that same problem you did, where it was cool, 10 players plus enough CR worth of monsters to challenge 10 players at level 3. It stopped being fun for anybody. So combining a not very fun experience at the table with my sudden lack of free time, plus 2 very fulfilling role-playing experiences on the side, meant it was time for me to make a change. So, I considered splitting the party. I figured I could probably run D&D or whatever, another game, with a smaller group of those people. But the problem was asking some people to join a smaller game and having the rest form another group felt like you've observed, like me trying to do the A team, B team thing. To be I pick Andrew and Ariel and Emily and Johan. Everybody else. And if you're watching this and you're part of that group, I just picked those people arbitrarily. I'm sorry. Everyone else in that group, that was just the first 4 names that came to mind. Anyway, I didn't want to do that, right? In the end, what I did was I just stepped down as a GM. I said, look, I don't have time to run this game as it is. Look at all these players. Reorganize yourselves. But it never really happened. I think a couple of campaigns started and then petered away, and I don't think that any of those people really play regularly together anymore. And to be fair, aside from Andrew, I don't really get to game with any of those people anymore because I'm so busy, right? And that's kind of a bummer, right? I'm sad that it happened that way. I have years of gaming with those folks that I don't really get to see, and that's okay, right? Relationships end. You don't have to cling to a game group just because you want to play. You can move on. There are lots of reasons to play or not play with people. Let's not be assumptive that a game group must exist. I mean, to play, you have to have one, but you can say no, you can let go. But let's try to work out what might be better for you, because I think you're in a different position, right? The game is coming to an end, this big game. You're reaching a natural point where you can say, I would like to game master, but... So here's the thing. Is time an issue for you? Because if you've got time and the energy and the excitement to run 2 games, fucking do it. Go for it, right? Let your players know that you don't want to GM one huge group, but you could totally do 2 groups. Do the balance of power thing. Do an evil campaign and a good campaign. Do the west and east marches. Do find ways to structure your campaign to deal with the whole group, but not all at once. That's totally okay. You can do that. There are alternate campaign structures, right? The West Marches, the original, the Ben Robbins West Marches, were designed for this. Steven's version of the West Marches adapted that for a different structure. Lots of players, different groups week to week. You can do it. There are other ways to structure your campaign. Now that means that you're going to have to do extra work, right? It is more than one kind of campaign. And this way, the benefit is you're not splitting by quality, but letting the groups assemble on their own, either into de facto week-to-week groups or into 2 specific groups, and you're going to let your players decide that. They're going to figure it out by their schedule and their personal preference. You can say, I'm willing to run 2 games. I can run them Friday and Saturday night at these times. If Friday is better for you, stand on the left side of the room. And if Saturday is better for you, stand on the right side of the room. Now fight. I mean, good. These are my groups, right? Keep in mind, let's talk about this again. If you're playing the office hours drinking game, get ready. The social structures of a tabletop role-playing game group are not the responsible aspect of the game master. It is not your job to handle the social shit, like scheduling. You are a part of that discussion, but it's not your job. It's not your job. It's not your job. Don't do it. Who plays with whom is a team effort. Now, if you've only got room for one game with one group of people and more people to play with and that want to play on the roster, I think it's reasonable to just say that. It's hard, I know. You're going to break some hearts. There's going to be tears. There's going to be weeping and moaning and gnashing of teeth. There's going to be tearing of bodices. Wait, no, that's the other. But basically, you're going to end up in this position where, and I think you're here already. You're in this place. Welcome to this place. It's a bad place to be. Let's get you out of here. GMs often end up in this position where you feel bad about exercising your rights to, like have boundaries and shit. There's this myth, and fuck this myth, but there's a myth of the noble, long-suffering martyr game master, right? The burned out, hunched over their notes, cigarettes drooping from their lips, whiskey coursing through their veins, desperate, worked to death game master who suffers for their player. Praise unto them. For aren't they glorious, suffering for us? Boy, GMing is hard. Shucks, we're lucky. Fuck that. Fuck that to death. It's not noble to be burned out. It's not noble to not have boundaries. It's not noble to suffer so that your friends can have a good time. That's some bullshit. You deserve better. Don't let that happen. So start there. Start there. Speak up. Tell your players, hey, this is boring. I'm not happy. This is difficult. And I don't want a GM for a group this big, but I really want a GM. But I've only got room for like 4 people in this campaign because any more is going to not make it fun for me. And my fun is important because I'm a person. I matter. And don't leap forward with a solution. That's what game masters are trained to do, right? Don't be like, here's the solution. I went on the internet and I asked Adam and he gave me this solution. I'm giving it to you. Do it because I'm the game master authority, right? Just tell them the problem. Sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do with a group of people that you care about and trust, and you're playing a game with people you care about and trust, right? Right? I hope you are. Is just be vulnerable. Is just say, hey, I am not having fun here. Help me. And hopefully your players can work that shit out. Maybe the current GM will take some of the players and do a game with them, or somebody else wants to step up and GM a different game on a different night. The thing is, there are a few games for which 10 plus players, like basic D&D, works well, but not very many, and certainly next to no modern games. And if you're not playing one of those, group size is a real thing. You don't play Monopoly with 25 people. You don't play Apocalypse World with 8. You tell your group, I want to run this game. The game is designed for this many people. I know we have more than that, but this is what I want to do. And then work it out like grown-ups. Everybody at the table, and I promise you this is the case, everyone at the table wants the same thing. They want to have a fun time playing RPGs together. Even the ones who are like, but I want to play a story game to immerse myself in sadness and write about my misery on an index card. That's fun for them. They want to have fun. Everybody wants to have fun. We might have different ideas of fun, but we all desire it. We want that byproduct. We want the sweet, sweet fun. I figure folks who all want the same stuff ought to be able to communicate about that stuff enough to get it. And one part of that is saying, no, thank you. This is not the kind of fun I want. So in this situation, the important thing is not to take all that responsibility on yourself. Talk about it with your soon-to-be players. Work together. Solve the problem. If you've been playing RPGs together, you should already know a thing or two about having conversations. Use those skills. Make it happen. Talk to your players. Stunning advice, I know, but do it. You're going to thank me. Establish boundaries. Say no. Say yes to the fun shit. Work as a team. I trust you. You can do it. So this has been Office Hours. Welcome to 2017, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our first episode. There will be many more to come in this beautiful year before us, and I hope that you will get involved. How can you do that, you might ask? I hear you. I can hear you through the internet. How, Adam? How do I get involved in Office Hours? I'm so full of questions. Go to my website, www.adam-koble.com. Click on that Office Hours link, submit your question, and then I'll answer it. Also, because it's coming up at the end of the month, if you're going to be in San Antonio, Texas, for the Penny Arcade Expo, South Edition, I also will be there. I will have bourbon, I will have tweed, and you will have questions, and I will answer them live. If you are someone who is not going to be in San Antonio, I will try my damnedest to record at least the audio portion of those shenanigans. I can't promise anything yet, but damn, we're going to try. All right? That's the end of this month. So, all right, I'm going to go. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for submitting your questions. Thank you for playing role-playing games, goddammit. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for trying to be better game masters and making this hobby just like a little bit sweeter. Y'all are the best. We'll see you next time.